My name is Lionel. I'm 57 years old, and I quietly funded a family that erased me from their photo wall. The day I found out was Mother's Day. I was sitting on my back deck in Collingwood with a coffee going cold beside me when my sister called and said, "Did you see what your daughter posted?" I hadn't. I opened Facebook and found it in about 10 seconds. Long table at the Georgian Room on her Ontario Street. The whole family, my daughter, my son-in-law, both kids, his mother, his aunt, 2 cousins I'd met once at the wedding. White tablecloth, flowers, the kind of Sunday brunch that requires a reservation 2 weeks out. His mother was in the center seat wearing one of those ribbon sashes you find at dollar stores, white with gold letters. World's best grandma. I counted the people, 8. Then I counted the chairs, 8. Not 7 with an empty one, nobody thought to mention. 8 people, 8 chairs, and a reservation someone had called in, with a head count that hadn't included me. I didn't comment on the post. I didn't call. I sat on that deck for another 20 minutes, finishing the cold coffee, and then I opened my banking app. 4 scheduled e-transfers on the screen. I looked at them for a long time. Then I put my phone in my pocket and drove to the shop. I run a plumbing and heating company. 3 vans, 4 guys, been at it since I was 24. My wife used to say I went to the shop the way other men went to the gym, to process things. She died 4 years ago in March. Pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. I go to the shop a lot now. That Mother's Day I didn't do any work. I sat at my desk and thought about the last 6 years. My daughter opened her gift shop on King Street in the spring of 2018. She'd been talking about it since she married my son-in-law, back when she still called me from wherever she was to talk through the money part. When she signed the first lease, she called me crying. Said the numbers scared her. Said she didn't know if she could make rent in the slow months. I told her to sign the lease and not to worry about the slow months. That same week, I set up an Interac e-transfer to go out on the 1st of every month. $1,100 to cover the shortfall. I didn't tell my son-in-law. I didn't even tell my daughter I was doing it long term. I just did it, the way you do things that need doing without making a speech about them. In the fall of 2021, interest rates went up, and they called me from the driveway of the house they'd just bought. Voices tight, saying the mortgage renewal had come in nearly $600 higher than the old payment. I added a second transfer. $580 a month toward the difference. Told them to call me if it changed. My son-in-law had a clean record when they married, but after a speeding ticket and an at-fault fender bender, his insurance shot up to something unreasonable. He'd been borrowing my truck for client showings anyway, so I put him on my commercial policy as an additional driver. That was 2020. It just stayed there. $340 a month I absorbed into my business overhead and never mentioned. The 4th transfer was the one I thought about most that day in the shop. $1,100 a month into an arrest book for my 2 grandkids. I opened the account the week my grandson was born. I have never withdrawn a dollar from it. My son-in-law took the family to the Dominican Republic in February, and I did the math on what that trip cost. It matched what had come out of the savings account I'd seen listed on a joint statement the month before. I did not say one word about it. I added it all up on a piece of scrap paper from my desk. $3,140 a month. Some of those had been running 6 years. One had been running nearly 4. I knew the number already. The way you know something you've been deliberately not looking at. Roughly $240,000 over the life of the transfers, plus the wedding, plus the down payment I gave them on the house, because his parents had offered nothing, and I didn't want my daughter to start her marriage underwater. I sat in the shop until 7 o'clock that Mother's Day evening. Then I drove home, and I did not cancel anything yet. I needed to understand one more thing first. I went to my daughter's house on the Thursday. I'd texted that I was coming. She texted back a thumbs up. When I got there, her car was in the driveway, but she answered the door and said she had a call she couldn't reschedule. She handed me off to the kids and disappeared upstairs. My granddaughter ran at me the way 5-year-olds do, full speed, no brakes, and called me Grandpa. My grandson was standing in the kitchen doorway in his hockey socks, and he said something that made me put my hand on the counter to steady myself. "Hi, Lionel." Happy. No meanness anywhere in it. He said my first name the way he'd say the name of a teacher he liked. "You don't call me Grandpa anymore," I said. He shrugged the shrug that means something's already been settled somewhere above his pay grade. "Mom," said Grandpa as Dad's dad. She said it's nicer for him. When did she say that? I don't know. Before Christmas. My granddaughter was already pulling at my jacket, asking if I'd brought cookies. She hadn't heard the conversation or didn't understand it yet. I crouched down. My knees don't love that anymore, and I told my grandson, "You call me whatever feels right, but I want you to know who I am." He said okay and went back to whatever he'd been doing. That's the right amount of concern for an 8-year-old to have. I stayed 40 minutes, helped my granddaughter with a puzzle, watched my grandson explain a hockey rule to me with the conviction of someone who has never been wrong about anything. Then I said I'd see them soon, and I drove to my sister's place on the highway east of town. My sister has a talent I've spent most of my life trying to avoid. She says the thing, whatever the true thing is that you don't want out loud, she says it. My wife loved her for this exact reason. It's taken me decades to. She poured tea, and I told her about Mother's Day. The 8 chairs, the sash, the reservation. Nobody thought to call me about. I told it flat, the way I'd describe a failed pressure test to a customer. She listened without interrupting, which she only does when something is serious. When I finished, she got up and came back with a folded piece of paper. "Have you seen this?" It was a campaign flyer. My son-in-law was running for town council. Ward 2. The front had a photo of the whole family on the front porch of his parents' place in Barrie. My daughter, him, both kids, his father with his hand on my grandson's shoulder. Family, community, accountability. "Where'd you get this?" "It's been at the pharmacy for a month, at the co-op, in my mailbox." I looked at my granddaughter's dress in the photo, green plaid. She'd worn it to her daycare Christmas concert. I'd been there. The photo wasn't taken that day, but the dress was the same one. "This was taken in January," I said. "Maybe February." February, I'd say. 4 months before Mother's Day. The replacement had already been finished. The brunch wasn't the decision. It was the announcement. My sister sat back down and wrapped both hands around her mug. "So here's my question," she said. "If they were done with you in February, why were the e-transfers still going out in May? I have a friend who does my books at the end of every quarter. He retired from the bank 7 years ago, and he charges me in smoked lake trout, which is an arrangement I'd recommend to anyone. He came to the shop on a Friday evening, spread the ledger across my workbench, and didn't say anything for a long time. 'You know what you've sent out of here in the last 6 years,' he finally said. 'I know what goes out every month.' That's not the same question." He turned the sheet around and pointed at a column he'd circled twice. "This is your annualized pace. $37,440 a year." I kept wiping down a pipe fitting that didn't need wiping. 6 years, he said. "Plus the wedding, plus the down payment." "Don't." "Closer to 250, Lionel Ruff." He took his glasses off and looked at me. "Your retirement's short," he said. "I've told you twice." He had. I'd pushed it back once when rates went up, and I'd added the mortgage transfer, and once when the shop needed a new van. I'd never told him exactly why, not all of it. Some of it I hadn't told anyone. "What are you going to do?" he asked. I told him I didn't know yet. That wasn't completely true. I think he knew it wasn't, and he let me have it anyway. He's good like that. It's why he catches fish. I gave my daughter a chance. I want to be clear about that, because everything that came after depends on it. I called her on the Sunday, 7 rings before she picked up. There was noise behind her, a restaurant or a shop, someone laughing nearby. "Hey Dad, everything okay?" I didn't mention Mother's Day. I had it ready in about 20 different forms, and I chose none of them. I told her I'd been thinking I'd like to come for dinner one night, see the kids. There was a pause that had a lot in it. "This week's pretty packed, and honestly, you know how you can get at those big group things. It would just be you and us anyway. It might feel..." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. "Do you know what your son calls me now?" I said. 3 seconds. Somewhere behind her a door opened and closed. "Don't make this into a thing, Dad. I've got a lot going on right now. I'm asking a question. I have to go." She hung up. I stood in my kitchen with the phone at my side. She hadn't asked what I meant. Not "what does he call you?" Not "what are you talking about?" She'd said, "Don't make this into a thing," and you only say that to a question you already know the answer to. My daughter had known. She'd sat across from me at my grandson's birthday in March, and she'd known. She'd texted me a thumbs up every time I said I was coming by, and she'd known. I opened the banking app that night. The light over the kitchen stove was the only one on. I did it in order, top to bottom. Transfer 1, the gift shop rent, $1,100. The app asked me if I was sure. I was sure. Confirm. Transfer 2, the mortgage supplement, $580. Confirm. The third one I couldn't do from the app. Monday morning, I called my insurance broker and asked her to remove my son-in-law as an additional driver on the commercial policy. She asked if I wanted it effective immediately or at renewal. I said immediately. She said she'd mail the confirmation to both addresses on file. I said, please do. The fourth transfer I did not cancel. I want to be careful here because people get this part wrong about me. That money was for my grandchildren. It was never for their parents. So instead, I drove 40 minutes to a credit union in the next town and had their SBIC moved into a custodian structure with me as sole account holder. Same kids, same beneficiaries, same monthly contribution, different lock on the door. Then I wrote a letter in the parking lot on a notepad and mailed it on the way home because a letter can't be deleted at a red light. 4 lines. I'd worked on them for 2 days. I told her the shop rent, the mortgage supplement, and the insurance had ended. I told her the education savings were safe and still growing, and that she could see the statements anytime she asked. And I told her this: I am still your children's grandfather. I am no longer your household's bank. The letter arrived Wednesday. Nobody called for 21 days. Before I go any further, I want to stop and ask you something honestly. If you were sitting where I was sitting, if this was your family, would you have canceled all 4 of them? Or would you have done what I did and protected the one that belonged to the kids? Type A if you'd have canceled everything. Type B if you'd have kept the education fund running. I read every single comment, everyone. Those 3 weeks were the strangest of the past 4 years. I took a contract job rewiring the electrical panel at a marina office. I know a guy, he owed me a favor, and I worked long days and came home tired in a way I hadn't been tired in a long time. The good kind. I restained my back deck. I called my sister, and we went to a movie she'd been wanting to see, and we got the large popcorn, and I didn't once think about the money. And every night around 9 o'clock, I'd check my phone. Nothing, not a call, not a text, not a thumbs up. I told myself that was information, not injury. On day 17, I made the mistake of opening Facebook again. My daughter had posted a video. Shaky, her voice bright the way voices go when someone is performing excitement for an audience. She was standing in an empty commercial space on King Street. Big windows, triple the square footage of the current shop. Big things coming this fall. So grateful. Location tag. Corner of King and Simcoe. The old kitchen supply store that had sat vacant since 2022. She'd signed a new lease, on a bigger space, in a month when the money she'd been counting on for the old one had already stopped coming. Either nobody had opened my letter or nobody had believed it. The first of the month was 13 days out. I was on a service call the morning the messages started. Furnace issue out on the 4th line. My phone started buzzing in my chest pocket at 11. I read the first text from my daughter at my truck. Dad, I think there's a problem with the bank. The rent didn't come through. I put the phone away and finished writing up the work order. By noon, I'd read 4 more texts and a voicemail from my son-in-law that used the word misunderstanding twice and asked me to circle back when I had a chance. I called at 6 after I'd washed up and eaten. My daughter picked up before the first ring finished. Dad, thank God, so the e-transfer. There's no bank error, I said. I canceled it. I'm allowed to cancel it. The sound she made, I've heard it twice in my life. Once when we told her about her mother. Once that evening on the phone. You can't just, Dad, we have a signed lease on the new space. I didn't know you'd signed something. You didn't tell me you were going to do this. I mailed you a letter 3 weeks ago. Then my son-in-law's voice, close to the phone, calm, in the specific way of a man who's been waiting for this moment. Lionel, hey, let's all take a breath here, okay? I hear you. I really do. A pause, and then he said the thing I hadn't prepared for, in the exact tone of a man closing a negotiation. So how long are you planning to keep this up? Not why, not what did we do wrong, how long? He thought this was a position. He thought I was a difficult supplier, having a rough quarter, who just needed to feel heard. Then he said the worst thing he could have said. You're punishing 2 little kids over a brunch. I let that sit on the line for about 4 seconds. Get a pen, I said. I don't need to. I heard a drawer open. The kids' education money hasn't stopped, I said. It never stopped. It's in reskip at the credit union in Cookstown. I'm the custodian. Both kids are beneficiaries. I'm still putting 1,100 in on the first of every month. Silence. Balance as of last Friday, $68,400. Longer silence. My son-in-law's voice came back, reshaped. You don't have the authority to hold that account by yourself. It's my money. My name was on it. You've never put a dollar in. That's not really. In 2022, $7,000 came out of the old savings account for a trip to the Dominican. I saw the withdrawal notification. I never said anything. I'm saying it now. That's why the account moved. My daughter got the phone back. She was crying, the real kind, not the kind that arrives on cue. Dad, please don't do this to the kids. I'm not doing anything to the kids, I said. I stopped the adults from spending the kids' money. She hung up. I sat in my kitchen with my hands on the table, and they were shaking. I want to be honest about that. Doing the right thing did not feel good. It just felt done. My son-in-law's father called me on a Tuesday. I hadn't spoken to him properly in 2 years, maybe longer. He lives outside of Barrie. We'd been in the same rooms at Christmas dinners and school concerts, and once at a cottage weekend that was pleasant enough, but we'd never had a real conversation. His name in my phone was just his first name, entered by my wife years ago and never updated. He didn't mention money, not once the whole call, and I want to give him that. He talked about family for a while, about how these things happen in every family, about how the important thing is what the children see modeled for them. He used the word maturity. He said the phrase set an example. And then, because he is skilled at this, he added, "And we're the oldest generation in this now, aren't we? Both of us." Then he got to it. My wife and I are hosting a dinner at the golf club on the 23rd, 30th anniversary of the business. We'd love to have you, Lionel. You're part of this family. Part of this family. He said it genuinely. That's what made it complicated. He was not performing it. 3 seconds. I could hear my own refrigerator. I'd be glad to come, I said. Thank you. Wonderful. Real relief in his voice, and I understood that not all of it was about me. In 3 weeks, there would be 60 people in a room, and a man who won't answer his phone will answer a question in front of 60 people. He was setting a table again. He just didn't know that I had my own reason to sit at it. The mortgage supplement went past due on the 9th. I know because the lender sends a courtesy notice to anyone who's been making supplementary payments, which, for nearly 3 years, had been me. I read it and filed it. On the 14th, my son-in-law was pulled over on County Road 21 for a cracked taillight. He handed over his license and his insurance card. The card was current, the policy was not. His name had come off my commercial coverage on the 1st of the month, and he'd been driving 14 days on a piece of plastic that no longer meant anything. Ontario does not take a relaxed view of that. The fine was significant. There was a mandatory filing. And there was a citation on the public record in a county of 12,000 people, where a man is currently running for town council on the platform of family, community, accountability. It was printed on his lawn signs in white letters on blue. The text from my daughter that night was 4 paragraphs. I'll spare you most of it. The line I remember: "You are blowing up our entire lives because you were left out of a brunch." I typed 3 different replies and deleted all 3. What I sent was, "My broker mailed the cancellation notice to the house on the 26th. Check the pile on the kitchen counter." She didn't answer that night. In the morning, all she wrote was, "He didn't open it." I've thought about that a lot. Whether he didn't open it, or whether she saw the return address and moved it, or whether it sat under a campaign flyer for 2 weeks because nobody in that house could imagine the money ever actually stopping. I sent one more text and put the phone down. I'm not blowing anything up. I stopped holding it up. Those are different things. She came to the shop the following Friday, late afternoon, crying before the door finished closing. I got her the good chair from behind the counter and a box of tissues from the bathroom, and I sat on a stool, and I let her talk for 10 minutes, without saying one word. She talked about her mother-in-law, about how every holiday runs through her, about a group text she's in and a different group text she isn't, about the $200 rule, anything over that and she has to ask, about how tired she is. Some of it was true. I could hear which parts. When she was done, I handed her another tissue. "I've got one question," I said. "Then I'll do whatever you want." She looked up. "Who taught my grandson to call me Lionel?" Her face did something I hadn't seen since she was 16, and I found something on the family computer I wasn't supposed to find. "That doesn't matter." "It's the only thing that matters. Tell me who, and I'll turn all 3 transfers back on tonight. Right now, from this phone." I put it on the counter between us. You know I don't bluff. The compressor in the back room kicked on. It runs about 90 seconds. She looked at the phone the whole time. She didn't say her mother-in-law's name. She could have. I'd have believed it halfway. She just didn't say anything at all. And that's how I found out, sitting on a stool in my own shop with my hands on my knees. "Okay," I said. "I gave you a real chance. You just turned it down." She stood up to go. At the door, she said the thing that made me decide to show up at that dinner. "You never pushed either, Dad." Hand on the door frame. Not crying anymore. "You never once asked why you weren't at things. You just disappeared. Do you know how that looks?" Then she left, and the bell above the door did its thing, and I stood in an empty shop at 5 o'clock on a Friday. I couldn't dismiss it, because she wasn't entirely wrong. 7 years. Every Christmas that got complicated, every birthday dinner that quietly became just her side of things, every photo I wasn't in. I'd never asked about a single one. I decided every time that asking would make me a burden, and the one thing I was not going to be was a burden. But here's what nobody tells you about deciding to stay quiet. Quiet doesn't read as dignity. It reads as consent. My wife used to do the asking. She'd say, "Lionel wants to know what time we're doing the holiday thing." And everyone would answer her, and I'd keep my mouth shut and still have a seat at the table. She was my voice for 28 years. 4 years without her, and nobody was speaking for me at all. So I got out the small notepad I keep in my shirt pocket for job notes and load measurements, and I wrote down what I would say if I ever got the chance to say it. I crossed it out twice, wrote it again, got it down to 4 sentences. 4 was what I could say without my voice going on me. I know my limits. I've spent 57 years learning exactly where they are. My son-in-law's father came into the shop on a Wednesday morning with 2 coffees and no appointment. We'd been in the same rooms maybe 30 times in 9 years. I'd never had a conversation with him longer than a hockey score. He set a cup on my counter and stood there like a man returning something he'd borrowed. "I need to ask you something," he said, "and I'd like a straight answer." "All right. Mother's Day, why weren't you there?" I looked at him. I wasn't invited. He didn't move for a moment. Then he set his own cup down on the edge of the counter, very carefully. "That's not what I was told." "What were you told?" "That you don't like those big gatherings. That you'd said you were busy." He rubbed the back of his neck. "She said it in the car on the way there, twice, like it was already settled." I pulled out my phone, scrolled back through my messages with my daughter, and turned the screen around. He read for a long time. "Mother's Day this year, nothing. Mother's Day the year before, nothing." "The sash," he said quietly. She put it over my head at the table. I'd never seen it before in my life. There were 60 people looking at me. He sat down on the customer stool and was quiet for a while. What I want to tell you about that moment is this. He didn't apologize for being at the table. He hadn't taken anything. He'd been handed a sash in front of a room full of people. That's not something you choose. That's something that gets done to you. "I've got 3 grandkids," he finally said. "Not one of them mine twice." He stood and put his coffee cup in my waste bin. At the door he turned around. "Come to the dinner," he said. "Sit down, I'll handle the seating." I won't pretend the 3 weeks before that dinner were easy. The gift shop lease on the new space had already been signed, and the landlord had issued a notice of default on the first missed payment. The old space on King Street had already been surrendered. She'd given it up before she could cover the new one. That's the part that still costs me something to think about. My son-in-law covered the first shortfall out of their joint account. That's how my daughter found out the joint account had $1,900 in it. She'd thought there was $22,000. She'd been told there was $22,000. He'd been drawing it down since January. Yard signs, a campaign consultant out of Toronto, a photographer for the family portraits taken on his parents' front porch. My sister told me they had the argument in the driveway, loud enough that the neighbor across the road came out to check her car twice. I want to say something honest here, and it isn't flattering. Part of me was glad. Not glad she was hurting. Glad she was finally standing in the room I'd been standing in for 6 years, looking at a number somebody else had decided for her. And my sister told me what he said to her out there, in the driveway, in front of the neighbor and the lawn signs and everything else. Don't make this into a thing. The same 4 words she'd used on me. She'd learned them somewhere and passed them to me first, and now they'd come all the way back around. The night before the dinner, I ironed the shirt my wife bought me at an outlet in 2017 for her cousin's wedding. She'd made me try it on in the store. She said the collar sat right. I've worn it 4 times since. My sister came over while I was doing it and stood in my kitchen doorway with her arms crossed. Don't go. I'm going. There'll be 60 people in that room, and his mother will have the whole place warmed up before you get through the door. She'll have you surrounded. That's right. I hung the shirt on the doorframe. That's also the only place in the world where they can't hang up on me. She thought about that for a while. Then she said she'd be there at 7, and if I needed a signal to leave early, I should look at her, and she'd start yawning. I read my 4 sentences out loud to the kitchen sink after she left. My voice held. That was all I needed to know. At 7 the next evening, I walked into the golf club, and there was an empty seat at the head table, with a card in front of it that said my name. The room smelled like cedar and candle wax. 60-some people, round tables through the main room, a long head table on a raised platform at the front. My son-in-law's father was across the room the moment I came through the door. He crossed toward me and shook my hand in front of everyone, held it a beat longer than a handshake needs. Lionel, glad you made it, loud enough to carry. He walked me to the front. I could feel the room recalibrate. 60 people doing arithmetic at the same time and arriving at different answers. The seat was at the center of the head table, directly beside his own. I could see his wife at the far end watching. She looked down at something in front of her, then back at me, then at her husband. She didn't say a word. My son-in-law was at the bar, with 2 men in golf shirts, who had the look of people who write checks to local campaigns. He saw me about 30 seconds after I sat down and went very still. My daughter was near the window. She went still too. Then my grandson came under somebody's elbow at a run. Lionel, how come you get that seat? 6 or 7 people around us heard it. There was a small ripple, the polite wince of a room that notices something it wasn't supposed to. My son-in-law's father answered before I could. He did not lower his voice. Because that's your grandfather's seat, buddy. My grandson frowned. But you're a grandpa too. I'm your grandpa on your dad's side. He put his hand flat on the back of my chair. He's your grandpa on your mom's side. That means you've got 2. Most kids only get 1. You're lucky. My grandson took about 2 seconds with that. Then he said okay and went to find his sister. 20 minutes in, the speeches started. My son-in-law's mother stood with a microphone and thanked everyone for 30 years. She told the story of how the business started, at their kitchen table with a phone book and a fax machine. And she told it well, and people laughed in the right places. Then she made a turn so smooth I almost missed it. 30 years teaches you what family really means, she said. It isn't about who writes the checks. It isn't about keeping score. A small pause. Real generosity, the kind worth having, is given without expectation, without strings, without wanting anything back. She was looking at the centerpiece, but her chin was angled about 15 degrees toward the seat I was in. 12 heads turned. The woman across from me became very interested in her bread. Then my son-in-law stood with his glass. He'd had 2 drinks and a good night with the golf shirt men, and he was smiling. To 30 years, he said, and to this family, which taught me that showing up is everything, that it's not about who funds things, it's about who's actually in the room. A laugh moved around the table. Maybe 15 people. Polite. It reached a section where nobody laughed at all and died there. My daughter was looking at her plate. My sister, 4 seats down, set her fork on the tablecloth without a sound and looked at me. What I felt in that moment, I've had a year to sort through it, wasn't rage. It was something closer to relief. Because he had just said it out loud. In front of 60 people, 2 of his campaign donors, 3 families from the school, and the reeve of the township. He had picked the one subject he could not afford to have discussed and put it on the table himself. I folded my napkin and set it beside my plate. I stood up. I'm sorry, I said, turning to my son-in-law's father. Would you mind if I said something? In front of 60 people, he could only say yes. I didn't take the notepad out. I'd read those 4 sentences enough times. My name is Lionel. I'm Megan's father, and I'm the grandfather on her side of the family. A chair creaked somewhere behind me. Nobody else moved. He's right, that family is about showing up. I've been showing up for 7 years. I turned slightly so I wasn't talking directly at my son-in-law. For 7 years, I've covered the rent on my daughter's shop. I've covered the mortgage supplement when the rates went up. I've carried insurance costs. I've funded education savings for both of my grandchildren. Last month, I stopped 3 of those. The 4th one is still running. That one belongs to the kids, not the adults. I looked at my son-in-law's father. I wasn't at Mother's Day. I'm not here tonight to embarrass anyone about that. I just needed to say this, somewhere I couldn't be hung up on. I set my other hand on the back of my chair. I don't need to be thanked. I needed a seat at the table. He made sure there was one tonight. I looked at him. Thank you for that. I put the microphone down on the tablecloth and I sat. 4 seconds. I counted them. Counting is what I do instead of feeling things in public. Then a man at the far end. I found out later he was on the school board. Started clapping. Then the woman across from me. Then the side table by the window. And then most of the room. It wasn't wild. It wasn't a standing ovation. It was something quieter than that. The sound of 60 people privately deciding something. My son-in-law's mother did not clap. She looked at the centerpiece. My son-in-law went out through the side door near the kitchen. My daughter stayed in her chair and looked at the table in front of her. I left before dessert. I'd said what I came to say, and I'm not built for the part that comes after. She caught me in the parking lot. You humiliated me in front of everyone I know. No tears this time. That's how I knew we were finally having the real conversation. I said my name, I said, and I said what was true. If the true part is humiliating, that's not something I did. She stood there with her arms around herself. July night, still warm. The kind you only get a handful of in this part of Ontario. It was me, she said finally. Teaching him to use your name, it was me. I waited. She kept correcting him at Sunday dinners, and he'd look at me and it was easier to just teach him myself than to fight about it every single week. I know. You don't know what it's like in that family. Then tell me. And she did. Some of it, the group texts, the holidays, the $200 rule, and then the part I hadn't known. Last winter, my son-in-law had told her that if she couldn't get aligned with his family's way of doing things, they should look at the whole arrangement. Those exact words. And then, because he's careful, he'd mentioned that his cousin in Mississauga does family law. She was 23 when I walked her up the aisle at St. John's. I thought he was a serious young man. Dad, are we okay? I looked at her for a long time. Not yet, I said. No. She flinched. I let her. I'm not angry that you were scared. I'm sad that you let me pay for it. I reached into my jacket and took out an envelope I'd had on the dash of my truck for 2 days. Inside was 1 page. The RESP account number, both kids' names and birth dates, the current balance, and the phone number at the credit union. You can call them any time you want, and they'll read you the balance, I said. You don't need my permission for anything on that page. She held it with both hands. 3 days later, I got a call I hadn't expected. My son-in-law's father before 7 in the morning. He sounded like a man who hadn't slept since the dinner. We had a fight, he said. Her and me, biggest one in 30 years of marriage. I told him I was sorry. Don't be. It was overdue. A long breath on the line. She stepped back from the school fundraising committee. They didn't ask her to. 2 of the women called to check in about the dinner. She withdrew Monday morning. In a town of 12,000, checking in is the entire penalty. I asked her to call you and apologize, he said. She won't. That's all right. It isn't, but I understand it. She got it in her head she was protecting her family, and once she decided that, everything else was just logistics. She can't apologize to you because she still doesn't think she did anything wrong. I looked out at my back deck, the one I'd refinished during those quiet 3 weeks. I told my son to withdraw from the ward race, he said. Told him it was the right thing after the insurance business. What did he say? Said the polling was still fine. Neither of us said anything for a moment. Somewhere on his end, a screen door opened and closed. Lionel, I can't fix my wife. I've been working at that since the 90s. He cleared his throat. But I can fix who sits where at my own table. You should come out to the lake Saturday. I've got a boat I bought 4 years ago and taken out twice. It's a crime. I said I'd bring the coffee. That's how I ended up with a friend at 57, which I had genuinely stopped expecting to happen. Two of my son-in-law's campaign donors pulled their support the week after the dinner. $11,000 between them, which in a ward council race is most of the operating budget. Nobody made a formal statement. In a town this size, nobody has to. One of them had been in that room. The other one's wife plays cards with a woman who was. The citation showed up in the county paper's public records column 3 weeks later. 11-point type, between a property transfer and a noise bylaw complaint. His name, the charge. Operating a motor vehicle without valid proof of insurance. The man was running on accountability. It was right there on his lawn signs in white letters on blue. He lost with 34% of the vote. 9 days later, I got an email from him. 2:80 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. Subject line, moving forward. About 280 words professionally written. He talked about the unfortunate breakdown in communication. He talked about resetting things for the sake of the children. He suggested coffee at the place on Dunlop Street, and in the second to last paragraph, he suggested we discuss restoring the previous financial arrangements. 280 words, and not one of them was sorry. Not I was wrong. Not I owe you an apology. Not even we should have done this differently. He'd written to a man whose money he wanted. He hadn't written to his wife's father. I didn't reply. My accountant asked me later that week why not, and I told him the truth. A man that careful with 280 words did not leave the apology out by accident. There was nothing in there to answer. My daughter brought the kids to the shop on a Thursday in September. She didn't come in. She parked out front, walked them to the door, went back and sat in the car with the windows down. I understood that. Some things you can't be in the room for yet. My granddaughter went straight for the parts bin. She likes to sort by size. My grandson stood in the middle of my shop, with his hands in his pockets like a man who had come to settle something. Are you my grandpa? He said. Like, actually. I am. How do I know? Fair question. Best one anyone had asked me in over a year. I reached into my shirt pocket and pulled out my notepad, flipped back through job notes and supplier numbers and load calculations and phone numbers of guys who've been retired for a decade, all the way to a page near the front. I set it on the counter and turned it around. May 14, 7:23 a.m., 7 pounds 11 oz 25 inches, Ethan James. My handwriting, ballpoint, a little shaky. That's the day you were born, I said. I wrote it down in the hospital hallway so I wouldn't forget the time. He read it for a long time. He's a reader. You were there? I was the second person to hold you. Your mum was first. That's the right order. He put his finger on the 723. Okay, he said, Grandpa. First time in 13 months, I did not make a thing of it. I said, You want to help me sort something? And he said, yeah. And I found him a job with a bin of hardware that didn't need sorting. And my granddaughter climbed up on my knee with a fistful of copper fittings and absolutely no idea that anything had happened, which is exactly how it should have been. My daughter came in when she came back for them. She stood by the counter with her keys in her hand. Dad, are you going to turn any of it back on? I'd been waiting for the question. I had the answer written down. No. She nodded. She'd expected it. But I watched something go out of her shoulders anyway. Here's what I will do. I took the page from my pocket. 1. The rest stays with me and I keep contributing every month. You can see the balance anytime you want. Nobody needs my permission to check it and nobody can touch the principal. 2. I take the kids every Wednesday. Not when it's convenient, every Wednesday. 3. My name goes on the list for family events before the reservation gets made. I'm not spending another year finding out about things on Facebook. 4. I looked up at her. I don't lend money. Not to you, not to him, not for an emergency, not ever again. If you're in real trouble, you come here and we work out what to do. But the transfers are done. She read the page twice. That's fair. It's not generous, it's just true. I spent 7 years getting those two things confused. She folded the page and put it in her bag. Then she stood there a moment longer. I've been seeing someone, she said, a counselor, in Barrie so nobody sees my car in town. Does he know? No. I didn't ask anything else about that. There are doors you let a person walk through at their own speed. Dad, are we going to be okay someday? I thought about it honestly, because she deserved honest. I don't know, I said. But we're starting from a real place now. We've never done that before. A year does a lot of quiet work. I sold a third of the company to my lead technician, 28 years old, better under a house than I was at his age. He runs the jobs now. I take the calls I want and I go to the lake on Saturdays, which I hadn't done regularly since my wife. Wednesdays, the kids are at my house. We do homework at the kitchen table where I used to do the accounts. Then we go to the garage. Last month I showed my grandson how to change a tap washer. Real one, real tools, real consequence if you don't seat it right. And he got it on the second try, and when he turned the water back on and it held, he looked at me the way kids look at you when something actually works in the real world. He calls me Grandpa. He has never once mentioned that he ever called me anything else. My granddaughter, who is 5, corrects strangers at the grocery store if they call me anything different. She does this with the full confidence of a 5-year-old who has decided how things are and sees no reason to revisit it. My daughter gave up the building on King and Simcoe, paid a penalty to exit the lease, and moved back into a smaller space 2 doors from the original shop. She does it all herself now, payroll, ordering, the whole thing. In March, she called me and said the shop had turned a profit for the first time. Not a large one. She was crying on the phone, and it was the good kind. She and my son-in-law separated in the spring. I want to be careful how I say this. That was not my doing. I never said one word to my daughter about her marriage, before or after any of this, and I am not going to start now. What happened is that she learned how to say no, and it turned out that in that house, no was structural. His mother and I don't speak. I see her at the farmer's market on Saturday mornings. She nods. I nod. That's the arrangement, and I've made my peace with it. His father comes to the lake the first Saturday of every month. He brings terrible coffee, and I've stopped mentioning it. The rest crossed $74,000 in June. I still put $1,100 in on the first of every month. I've never mentioned that number to anyone in this story except my accountant, my sister, and now you. Mother's Day came back around. I went to the shop. I want to be honest about that, because I think people expect the man at the end of a story like this to have been transformed into someone different. I hadn't been. It was Sunday morning, and the shop was where I knew how to be, so I unlocked it and started organizing a parts bin that didn't need organizing. At 10:30, my phone rang. Video call. My grandson's face about 4 inches from the camera, one nostril taking up a third of the screen. Grandpa, are you coming? We made something. Behind him I could hear my sister saying something, and my granddaughter shrieking about something entirely unrelated. Plates? Maybe? I was 14 minutes away. I made it in 11. 6 of us at my daughter's dining room table, her, both kids, sisters, my son-in-law's father, who had been invited separately and on his own terms, and me. There was a card on my plate, construction paper, cut crooked with safety scissors, colored in with the thick crayons, Grandpa Lionel. The L was backward. The I was 3 times the height it needed to be. My grandson, who is 8 and knows better, told me his sister had done that part and he'd let her. Nobody took a photo. At one point, my daughter reached for her phone and then set it face down on the sideboard and said, "No, let's just eat." My chair was at the end of the table nearest the kitchen. It's where I like to sit and always have, because from there I can get up and refill everybody's water without making anyone move their chair. My wife sat there for 28 years. I watched her do it and never thought about it once. The seat by the door, the one nobody fights over, but there was a card on it with my name on it, and the name was right. I've thought a lot about the difference between that table and the one in the Facebook photo. It isn't the restaurant or the tablecloth or how many people or who gets the center seat. It's that someone counted before they made the reservation, and when they counted, I was in the number. Here's what I learned at 57, and I'll leave you with it. People don't need to be at the center of the table. Most of us don't even want to be there. All any of us needs is to know the seat is ours, that somebody wrote our name on it before we walked in the door. And if nobody's been putting your name on that list, you're allowed to stop paying for the dinner. Before you go, one more question, and I want an honest answer. If it were you, would you have canceled all 4 of them, including the education fund? Or would you have done what I did and kept the one that belonged to the kids? Type A if you'd have canceled everything. Type B if you'd have done it my way. I read every single one of these, every one. And if any part of this landed somewhere for you, there are a few more stories linked below about people who figured out when to stop holding things up. Thanks for sitting with me all the way to the end.